Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stcenturywire.com. This is a live stream that's also going out on X. We're also going out on Facebook Live, as well as Rumble, BitChute, and of course, YouTube. YouTube, if they'll let us actually stream this. We had some problems last week, which we're in the background trying to fix. Copyright issues and all sorts of censorship issues, which YouTube is famous for. We're working all that stuff out. Thank you for your patience on that. Now, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation during this first segment, and I'll welcome our guest. He's in the green room right now. I'm going to welcome him on stage in a moment, but this is episode 533 of this weekly Omnibus News and Analysis radio program, again brought to you here on ACR. And fantastic midweek wire. We just launched that new program on Wednesdays. We had Freddie Ponton on. We'll have Freddie on again this Wednesday. We're breaking down a lot of issues, Ukraine. We talked about the Nord Stream issue as well. And today we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation, a little more in depth. Now, we gave you a little bit of a sneak preview about what you might find in this unpacking session we're going to have on the UK column news. I was on there Friday with Mike Robinson, and we gave a little bit of a sneak preview there of what to expect. But I'm going to bring on stage right now the author of this article, which is featured up at 21stcenturywire.com right here, exclusive. Former Ukrainian commander-in-chief can be prosecuted for a role in Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Now, this is an incredibly complex story, and this is like layers upon layers of deception, red herrings, things we know, things we don't know. And to help us navigate this a little bit, let me bring onto the stage our guest. His name is Jeffrey Brodsky. He is also a writer as well as a journalist. He actually was on site, one of the first people on site to cover the Nord Stream sabotage, which was down on the sea using drones with engineer Eric Anderson. You may be familiar with their work if you have been following the story. Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on your show, Patrick.
So, Jeff, let's get straight to it here. The article in question, again, we've linked to this. It's also on my X feed right now. Excellent piece. There's a lot in here, obviously, a lot to unpack. But let's just start with the crux of the story. The protagonist here, Valeriy Zaluzhniy, Jeffrey, very interesting character, former head of the Ukrainian armed forces, and somehow he ends up in London. He's decamped in Mayfair. They've turned him into the ambassador from Ukraine to Britain. There he is. He's scrubbed up very nicely. He's looking pretty posh in a Savile Row suit. That's his new role. And looking at your article, Jeffrey, it makes me question why Zaluzhniy was brought to London to begin with, because now things are kind of connecting a little bit, Jeff. So, I mean, I don't know if you can shed any more light on this, but just where do we need to start on this story, Jeff? And by the way, for those who don't know you, just introduce yourself and how you got into this story to begin with.
Well, as you said in your introduction, I'm a writer, but I'm not really a journalist. When the Nord Stream pipelines were blown up, and this is way back September 26, 2022, I was just fascinated and captivated. And I think, like many people who read independent media, we were frustrated that it seemed to be that mainstream media was not asking tough questions, not investigating the attack. And this is, after all, let's remember the scale of this attack. These pipelines are valued at $20 billion. And, their destruction, it stands as the largest act of industrial sabotage in history. And I would say the most pressing geopolitical mystery of our time. So despite not really having a background in journalism, I had done some nonfiction freelance writing. But I wasn't really interested in journalism, and I wasn't much of a political person in general. But I was frustrated that this wasn't being seriously investigated. So I just read as much about it as I could. I did some independent research on my own. I talked to some people about it. And when I felt that I had enough compelling information, and I felt that I had enough to say that wasn't being reported before. I won a grant to investigate the sabotage, and I've been investigating it ever since. And it's still, I think, a fascinating, very important topic, especially for world peace. So
No,
that's sort of my
absolutely.
background. My background is mainly in literature, not in investigative journalism.
Right. So you're sort of an incidental or accidental investigative journalist in this, and it is a fascinating story. I agree with you. This is one of the most compelling. The Ukrainian super soldier and diver story. However, and the analysis in here is pretty compelling. I mean, you've talked to a number of international law scholars, and what are they telling you here? Because the implication is that Valeriy Zaluzhniy, as the new Ukrainian ambassador to Britain, that one assumes that he has diplomatic immunity. And while he's been fingered for the Nord Stream sabotage in this Ukrainian scenario, but does he really have diplomatic immunity, Jeff?
Not according to six very highly regarded legal scholars that I've spoken to. So, let's take a step back. Where did this all start? So in August 2024, an allegedly bombshell report was published in the Wall Street Journal. And, unless you were impersonating, Rip Van Winkle, if you have any interest whatsoever in geopolitics, you probably read this article. So I probably won't talk too much about it, but basically the article says that Ukraine was responsible for the nurturing sabotage. In the article, it says that Zaluzhniy, General Zaluzhniy, whose picture we have just seen, he says and he was the highest ranking Ukrainian military officer at the time of the attack. And of course, as you said, Patrick, he is now the current ambassador to the UK. So allegedly, he was overseeing the operation and he greenlighted the attack, right? This same article goes on to say that President Zelensky initially sanctioned the plan, but then later he tried to stop it at the behest of the CIA. This is quite convenient because here we go. It exonerates Zelensky. But then the same article, the Wall Street Journal, goes on to say that Zaluzhniy enjoys diplomatic immunity as the ambassador to the UK. Well, when I read the article, that was one of the things that I'm not a legal scholar, but it didn't seem right to me. And sure enough, I contacted 6 legal scholars, all of whom I should say are published authors, have written books on international law. They do research in things like the law of immunity, diplomatic and consular law. So these are people that really know what they're talking about. These are scholars. And all 6 of them conclusively told me Zaluzhniy is not immune from prosecution just because he's the ambassador to the UK. Now, it doesn't mean he can just be tried and prosecuted immediately. There are steps, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of these steps. But to make a long story short, the Wall Street Journal got this crucial component of their article completely wrong. Zaluzhniy is not immune from prosecution, and we have now scholars on the record telling us this and correcting that. I would say pretty serious omission in the Wall Street Journal article, especially because this article was read by tens of millions of people. It was the thing for half of the month of August almost.
Yeah, I'll bring that back up on screen again. I mean, this is the Wall Street Journal story here. Yeah, this was huge. I mean, August is normally, sometimes slow in terms of news, in terms of a news month, but this basically dominated pretty much everything. And what was interesting about this, and we can get into what you think the merits or the drawbacks of this story here by Boyan Pansevsky. Boyan Pevsensky, I think his name is. So we can talk about the Ukrainian diver story as a viable theory or not. We can discuss that, but let's bring your piece up on screen as well here, and we'll be able to kind of go through this. Now, it's my understanding, Jeff, and your legal analysis here is really the first part of the article. That's up at 21stcenturywire.com. And I have to say, this legal analysis is very thorough, Jeffrey. You have not left many stones unturned in terms of the possibilities. And we'll look at some of the details of this. But it's my understanding that you have a couple of potential options here that would cause, or available options here, where someone could take Zaluzhniy out of the UK. Let's say if this case goes into some sort of a hearing, or someone needs to be deposed in Germany or even in Ukraine. But the receiving state, which is the UK, when you have an ambassador, the receiving state receives the ambassador, in this case, from Ukraine. And the receiving state, you have immunity, but only immunity for, is this my understanding correct, for crimes that would be committed in the receiving state. This wouldn't cover previous international crimes or war crimes that happened before you were appointed ambassador. So from that, is that one of the glaring omissions that you picked up in this Wall Street Journal report? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, the glaring omission is the fact, and I'm just going to read. I'm just going to read what one of the scholars told me, because he says it very clearly. He writes, diplomatic immunity protects diplomats from jurisdiction of the host state, as you pointed out, the UK in this case, as outlined in Article 31 of the Geneva Convention on Diplomatic Relations. However, this immunity generally applies only to the actions of the diplomat in the receiving state. So what you just said was correct. You hit the nail on the head. The only addition to that is, and other scholars have spoken to me about this, it's not only when he's in the UK. He's also immune when he travels on diplomatic missions outside of the UK. So if he's working or traveling, is in his capacity as an ambassador, he is immune. But let's say he went on vacation to Germany, one of the countries that should be taking a great interest in unraveling this Nord Stream mystery, because it has butchered their economy, the loss of cost-effective Russian gas. He could be, for example, arrested in Germany if he was there on vacation and not there as the ambassador to the UK. So yes, you did hit the nail on the head, basically.
And the other option is actions in the receiving state, not when he's in Ukraine. Then there's also, Ukraine could also waive immunity. That's another possibility. Or the UK could declare him persona non grata as well. And so is there a possibility that a European arrest warrant or Interpol or something like that could be raised, or through Eurojust at The Hague? Do we have any idea of how that might be processed?
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because it gets a little complicated, because you have a lot of actors here. We have the UK, we have Ukraine, and then we have other countries that may want to maybe not prosecute him, but at least question him under oath as a citizen rather than as the ambassador to the UK. So which country has the power to waive his immunity? Because a prerequisite to him being extradited to any country to testify under oath, for example, is that his immunity is waived. Who has the power to do this? Well, it is the sending state, which is Ukraine, of course, in this case. So, but he's stationed in the UK. So here's what would happen. Let's say that Germany wanted to prosecute him, or at least question him. Okay, so the UK would request to Ukraine that his immunity is waived. Okay, and then he could be extradited to another country. So it's the UK. It's the UK that has. Excuse me. It is Ukraine that has the final decision to waive immunity, but the UK can request his immunities waived. That is one option. Okay. Another legal resource would be, for example, I mentioned earlier, it's something called the Geneva Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And this provides that Germany can ask the British government to request Zaluzhniy's immunity be waived. Again, Ukraine doesn't have to do this. They wouldn't have to accede to this request. But I'm told by legal scholars that this step would at least bring some pressure to bear on the UK. However, like I said earlier, it's important to understand that the receiving state, again, the receiving state, the UK, can only request this of Ukraine. They can't do it themselves. But there are some more legal options, and we can get into those now or get into those later if you want.
It is interesting, because he's kind of the fall guy in this. I mean, I know the official story that they're running with is that This was something that was dreamed up by Zelensky and his inner team there at the Defense Military Intelligence. Then the CIA got wind of it. This is their story, by the way, not ours. The CIA got wind of it, and then they tried to stop it, but it was too late. And the divers had gone rogue. I mean, this is like something out of one of those, spy novels, Jeff. I mean, it's really hard to believe, but that's the story they're going with. So that it does have legal implications, doesn't it? Especially for Zaluzhniy. So they've kind of thrown him, really not thrown him under the bus, but and this he's not an inconsequential character. He's been brought to London for a reason, Jeffrey. They're teaching him English. He's just launched a book. I think I've got that here. He's got the trilogy of a new book. Here you go. Yahoo News. Zaluzhniy releases new book, My War, first planned in a trilogy. He's got an agent. They really fixed this guy up. I mean, he could be a future president of Ukraine. I mean, I'm not exaggerating there. That it does look like one of those people that the Brits are lining up. What's your general thought about Zaluzhniy and the predicament he's in?
Well, let me answer that by going through some of the legal things. But let me make one comment, just a very surface comment about the mainstream media reporting. So, two of the major outlets are German outlets that have broken the, we'll talk about this later, the Andromeda story and the connection to Zaluzhniy and the six, alleged saboteurs that rigged the pipelines with bombs using the Andromeda, which is a sailing yacht, 15-meter sailing yacht. The Der Spiegel reporting, they deny that Zelensky knew about this until June, whereas the Wall Street Journal reports that he initially approved the mission. So there's some inconsistencies in the reporting. To sort of break down, some of this complex legal stuff and just put it in simple terms. What we can probably do is let's take, for example, why don't we take the case of Germany? Okay. Now there'll be a lot of skepticism here because people are going to say, well, Germany has showered the Ukraine with military aid during the war. It's a big supporter of Ukraine. So, why would Germany do this? Well, Germany does have enormous incentive to, let's say, to bring these perpetrators to justice. What do I mean by that? Germany, perhaps, of course, after Russia, is by far the countries that have undergone the most economic hardship resulting from the sabotage. Just to give one simple example. Your audience probably knows there's Nord Stream 1, there's Nord Stream 2. They each have 2 lines, so there are 4 lines in total, right? Nord Stream 1 went online in 2011. Nord Stream 2 was never certified, although it did have gas in it when the bombs ruptured one of its lines. So Nord Stream 1 alone, Patrick, delivered 59 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year to Germany. That volume is staggering. It is as much as 66% of the country's gas consumption and 42% of its supply. So this is a big deal from Germany. A lot of this massive deindustrialization we are seeing in Germany, if not most of it, is due to the fact that they no longer have access to this cost-effective Russian gas, and therefore their industries, especially their industries like chemical industries, that rely on heavy energy consumption to produce their products, they've lost their competitive advantage. So there is major reason why Germany could actually pursue this, and we know the German economy is suffering poorly much right now. Also, we have German elections coming up. Well, 2 of the parties, Sarah Wagenknecht's party and the AfD, have said publicly that one of their options is to start delivering gas through the one pipeline of Nord Stream 2, which is the line B of Nord Stream 2, that was not damaged in the attack, and it's still intact. So there is a small chance that this is actually pursued. So it's not just like, oh, this is never going to happen. The geopolitical dynamics and the wheels of that are turning. We will see what happens, because I imagine these German elections are going to have a huge impact on this. The second thing is that this isn't just an attack on Russia. This is West on West attack, because yes, Russia outright owned Nord Stream 2, but Nord Stream 1 was 49% owned by Western energy firms, 2 or 3 of which I don't remember, but certainly at least 2 were German energy firms. So there is incentive to get down to the bottom of this. And also for the EU as a whole. I mean, something like 30% of the total gas demand of the EU could have been fulfilled by these pipelines and was fulfilled by these pipelines. So this is a big deal. So, what can be done? And then, of course, so what can be done? Well, let's say Britain wanted to do something, or let's say Germany pressured Britain behind the scenes and said, do something. So like you said, one is to declare Zaluzhniy persona non grata. And this can be done, okay? So let's say Britain declared him persona non grata. What would happen? He could be thrown out of the UK, sent back to Ukraine, and then extradited to Germany. Well, is this far-fetched? Well, maybe, but remember that there have been very public reports in the mainstream media that Zaluzhniy and Zelensky have a political rivalry. Zelensky was his greatest political rival and is certainly fighting for him for the presidency of Ukraine. So maybe Zelensky himself says, okay, maybe he waives his immunity and lets him be prosecuted. This is possible. There are some legal and diplomatic avenues.
That's a very interesting angle you bring up there, Jeffrey, because yes, we know how insecure Zelensky is. Some say, he's teetering on the verge of total paranoia right now. He's suspended elections. The end is potentially nigh with the suspension of U.S. funding to Ukraine and these types of things. And if he sees that, of course, whoever the replacement is, I mean, if they have elections, then Zaluzhniy would probably be put forward, I would think. But if there was an engineered coup, which is not unusual, the US and British do this all the time, they'll engineer a regime change. But you'd need someone who has the respect of the military to do that. And someone who the military would, who would follow the commands of whoever the interim president is. And actually, he fits the bill for that. So what you're talking about there, Jeff, is not far-fetched. That Zelensky could potentially, for some temporary advantage, throw Zaluzhniy under the bus. I mean, I'm not saying that's out of the realms of possibility. I think that's very plausible. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. I mean, it would be Machiavellian, but it's certainly not beyond him. As you said, he's desperate. He knows his regime is coming to an end, and this is possible. What I think maybe might be interesting, if you wanted to talk about this, Patrick, for your audience, this might be interesting. That Poland, there's a whole. So you have UK, Ukraine, Germany. Well, the other actor that we have not spoken about yet is Poland.
Oh yes,
because Poland, of course, in the news. Poland, of course, has a long history of opposing the Nord Stream project, the Nord Stream pipelines. Saying that this was a threat to its security, and this would mean Russia was going to take over Europe, this, that, and the other. So Poland has a long-standing opposition to these pipelines. And of course, Poland was reported by mainstream media in Germany and in this Wall Street Journal report that Germany has issued an arrest warrant for one of the divers who was living outside of Warsaw. And supposedly Poland ignored the arrest warrant. Germany supposedly was up in arms about it and furious about it, and Poland, their government is calling him a hero, calling these saboteurs heroes. So let me, if I could, I'll get a little bit into the Polish legal component of this.
Yeah, we put this up on screen here. This is from Ukraińska Pravda. Polish prosecutor's office says Nord Stream explosion suspect has left for Ukraine. So the Poles let him go, basically. Is that what happened? They didn't arrest him. They kind of let him flee, didn't they?
No, he's in fact, if we want to put up my article, there's also that tweet. Is it the Polish prime minister or the president? I don't remember. But what that tweet from my article is, this is ignited a diplomatic row at the highest levels of government.
Yeah, there it is. Donald Tusk.
If you want to read that, maybe you want to read that for the audience. I mean, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so Donald Tusk from Poland says, to all the initiators and patrons of Nord Stream 1 and 2, the only thing you should do today about it is apologize and be quiet. So basically, do your patriotic duty and look the other way, you know, because this is the Polish view of this issue, which is that we support the Nord Stream sabotage. I mean, that's even to not even mention Sikorsky, Ann Applebaum's husband, tweeting out the day of the explosion saying, "Thank you, USA."
So let me just read for your audience what one of these legal scholars told me about Poland. He says the following. And by the way, I should also mention that all 6 of these sources are quoted by name. There's no anonymous quotes. These people all went on the record. They're all in the article that you published on 21st Century. So 21st Century Wire. So he says, if Germany believes that Poland is deliberately instructing the investigation, Germany could file a complaint at the European Court of Justice, arguing that Poland is violating European law by not cooperating in a cross-border criminal investigation. He continues, Germany could also use diplomatic action through EU channels or even, listen to this, even sanctions within the EU legal framework if there's clear non-compliance with mutual legal assistance obligations. So Germany has some legal recourse against Poland also, which is fascinating. And the relationship between those 2 countries right now is not good. They're at each other's throats. And when this war in Ukraine eventually ends, this may break out into the open.
Wow, this is fascinating. I mean, because it really kind of puts a lot of countries in a potential bind here. We're not even talking about the very plausible scenario that this might have been done by NATO, a joint operation happening during Baltops 22. Of course, Seymour Hersh's reporting is quite famous in implicating this particular scenario. But it means, Jeffrey, that you have Germany, you have Denmark, you have Sweden, you have the United States, you have Britain, you have Poland, you have an innumerable number of potential NATO member states that could in some way have knowledge of or have been part of this sabotage operation. And so this creates a whole lot of political problems potentially between these countries, that whoever is going to be holding the can on this, or everybody has to agree to be quiet about it for a period of time. I mean, it's very awkward, this situation, for NATO, but also for the individual member states as well. And the US is putting a lot of pressure on Europe right now on many different levels. You know, go ahead, Jeff.
It is. I should probably, mention your audience what the Russian, because Russia has some legal, it's very limited, but Russia itself has some legal recourse also. But before we do that, we've mentioned, was this a NATO operation? Did the US do it in conjunction, working together with Norway, as Seymour Hersh has reported, or did the German mainstream media and the American mainstream media get it right? And is this team of 6 Ukrainians who allegedly traveled aboard, like we said, this Andromeda, which is a 15-meter sailing yacht, did they actually execute this sabotage operation? But before we discuss the details of this Andromeda theory, your audience is probably thinking, well, okay, this guy investigates Nord Stream. What does he think? Who did it? Who does he think did it? And I'm going to come out and say that I do not know whether it was ultimately Ukrainian divers or American divers who placed the bombs on the pipelines. However, I don't think at this point that is really the important thing, because we don't have definitive proof either way of that. But I think everyone who's following this story should keep their eyes on the ball. Why? So let's just say, even if Ukraine's role was merely to provide plausible deniability for the U.S., and these 6 Ukrainians aboard Andromeda were, they're simply patsies who never actually rigged the pipelines with the bombs. Okay, we know for sure now that Ukraine is implicated, and we know for sure at a minimum they're accessory to the crime. We also know the U.S., again, for sure, certainly, we know the U.S. for sure provided diplomatic cover and certainly concealed evidence, which is, of course, a crime in itself. So neither country warrants exoneration, in my opinion, and frankly, neither does Sweden. We can talk about Sweden later, too, because they play a critical role in this massive global crime. So, I should say, I believe at this point that, the nationality and the backers and the planners and the executors of the operation is really not the most important aspect of this crime. I think instead, we as people who, are concerned about imperialism and international, and believe that international law has a purpose, and that or believe that wars almost never lead to anything productive, and neither does violence. The most important aspects of this crime, we should keep our our gaze on the fact that this is an illegal operation that was perpetrated by the West, not only on Russia, but it's also a major West on West unresolved crime. And that is really what's important at this stage. And there's just no doubt, just to say it again, there's just no doubt that the US and Ukraine are involved in some level, whether or not it was Ukrainian or American divers who actually planted the bombs. At this point, that's not the most important thing.
Yeah, and then just to move on, I mean, you mentioned Denmark and Sweden, and this is where things are getting very interesting. I just want to also point people to Jeffrey's Substack. If you go, there's some great investigative pieces here. One of the most important ones, of course, is right there in the upper left-hand corner there, about the story regarding the High Courts of Justice, Business and Property Courts of England and Wales. And the lawsuit is very revealing, isn't it, with Nord Stream Aggie and Lloyd's of London. And this has kind of brought in some new stuff to discovery that has kind of made this, it's really spiced up this case. Jeff, if you just explain that aspect of it.
Yeah, well, thanks for showing my Substack, and I hope that people who are interested in the story read that, because it's a fascinating story. I won't be say too much about it in hopes that people read it. But to make a long story short, the pith of it is that the owners of Nord Stream 1, which is what you said, Nord Stream Aggie. Did you say Aggie or AG, by the way, Patrick?
Or no, AG, Nord Stream AG, yeah.
Okay, so I thought maybe I was getting it wrong. So Nord Stream AG, who are the owners of Nord Stream 1, who include, again, 49% of those owners are Western energy firms. They're suing their insurers, who are Western insurers. Again, this is West on West, West against West. They're suing the Western insurers, if I remember correctly, is it 400 million euros or 300? I think it's 400 million euros. For 300 million euros, because they're saying someone blew up our pipelines, and therefore we're not being able to use them, we're not getting revenue, et cetera. And so the insurers have responded in a court of law saying, well, they're not insured because this was it was an act of war, and our insurance doesn't cover that. Well, so Nord Stream AG has responded to the insurer saying, well, okay, then tell us who did it, because you have to identify the perpetrator. So what's so fascinating about that is that if the Western insurers are either gonna have to pay up to the tune, I think it was 400 million euros, if I remember correctly, maybe 3, but I think, again, 400 million euros, they're gonna have to pay all that money out, or they're gonna have to unmask the perpetrator. They're gonna have to prove in a court of law who did it and how they know. So it's a fascinating thing, and I would encourage people to read the piece. It's actually pretty short. It's a pretty short piece, but it's interesting stuff.
No, absolutely. And again, we'll put that up on screen. The title of Jeff's Substack here, New Revelations from Nord Stream Expedition. And I might also add to that, I'll bring up on screen as well, your article, which you did at the time with, I believe it was the Gray Zone. Let me see if we can bring that up on screen as well, where you were actually on site. 1 second. Let me see if we can find that. Here we are. There it is. So yeah, Jeff, tell us about that. I mean, before we go any further, Jeff, I mean, that was quite an adventure, wasn't it? Being one of the first people on site there with the Scandinavian engineer Eric Anderson, and you guys done an incredible recce. You've reported on it here in the Gray Zone, which is I think that's linked in your article in 21st Century Wire. What was that experience like, Jeff?
Well, let me also I should say beforehand, I'm given permission by the outlets that I write for to repost my articles on Substack once they appear in the original outlet first,
Mhm.
and that article about the legal proceedings and legal proceedings, that was actually first published in Covert Action magazine. So
Okay.
it
Oh
can be
yes,
read there. Yeah,
great
originally.
publication, Covert Action. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, wonderful editors and wonderful people writing for that. I learned a lot by writing for them. So, what did how did this all happen? Well, I met Eric on Twitter. I was saying things about sabotage that I think he liked, and he was saying things that I know I liked. And we went there. We went to the blast sites, and we captured drone images that had never been seen by the public before. We captured. We had drone images, drone footage. We had the boat came equipped with a sonar device. We had sonar images, and we were able to do a forensic analysis. We really wanted to figure out three things when we went there. We wanted to know the amount of explosives used to blow up the pipelines. In other words, how much TNT equivalent was used. We wanted to know the type of charges. Were these linear shaped charges? Were these bulk explosives? Were these other kinds of with these other kinds of shaped charges? And we wanted to know where the bombs were placed. Were they placed on the pipeline, under the pipeline, next to the pipeline? Were they buried in the seabed? Those were the three things that we wanted to find out. And of course, we wanted to capture these images and share them publicly of the blast sites, because the BBC and Expressen had gone to one of the blast sites before, but we were the only independent investigation. In fact, we're still the only independent investigation that had gone to at least four of the blast sites, to four different places. So the big thing that came out of that, there were a lot of things, but I guess the most important thing from that expedition was that the mainstream media, the Guardian and the New York Times, for example, they were writing articles saying that about 500 kilograms of TNT were used to rupture the pipelines at all the blast sites. And we figured out that was way off. Our data indicates that it was only between 10 and 40 kilograms. And most experts that I interviewed and talked to and quoted on the record say it was closer to 10 kilograms of explosives. So mainstream media was, what was it? They were was it 100? They were nearly 100 times off, not 100, 50 times. They were 50 times off on how much TNT was used TNT equivalent, I should say, was used to blow up these pipelines. That was really the big thing that came from that, in addition to the wonderful sonar images that the captain of the boat was able to capture, and the wonderful drone images that Eric was able to capture. You saw him on that video with the drone in his hand.
That's what's this footage of here, Jeffrey? What are we looking at? The boot.
Yeah, let's talk about the boot. So the boot. This when I published that article, it really went viral. Probably not for the right reasons. Let's talk a little bit about the boot. So we found the boot in the Swedish exclusive economic zone, about 5 meters from the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, line A. Okay, and of course we were like, oh my gosh, what's this boot? And we were very interested in it. Well, it turns out, okay, that the boot, and let me quote Eric here if I can.
Yeah, we'll bring up your article here. We'll try to grab that in a moment. But the gist of, I think, what Eric Anderson is saying is he believes that that boot might not be from somebody who was doing a NATO op during Baltops 22.
No, we now know. We didn't know at the time. Okay, we didn't know at the time, but we do know the backstory on the boot. Okay, here's the backstory on the boot, and I think you've spoken about this. I was listening to one of your I think the Wednesday program, you spoke about this. The boot was dropped probably on November 26th, 2022, and it was dropped from the foot, came unlodged from the foot of a Norwegian diver whose boat was chartered by the U.S. in November to go investigate these crime scenes. Okay, what's the boat? Its name is escaping me right now, but you talked about it in your last. Oh, the Norman Frontier. So the Norman Frontier is a Norwegian vessel that was chartered by the U.S. right, to go investigate the crime scenes. During that time, one of the divers lost his boot and it was this boot that we saw. So it has nothing to do with the perpetrators of the crime. But the boot does show something important. And it shows that the US the entire time was saying, well, we trust the German investigation, we trust the Danish investigation, we trust the Swedish investigation, and therefore we're not going to do too much ourselves because these are independent investigations. The US also blocked on 2 occasions the establishment of a independent international investigation that would have been established by the UN Security Council. So at the same time that the US is praising the thoroughness and the thoroughness of these European investigations, they're chartering boats themselves to go investigate the blast sites. So that demonstrates that the US was lying when they said, oh, we're just going to let the Europeans investigate this. Now, I know Joe Biden went on TV and said, we're going to send down divers. But let's remember when Joe Biden said he was going to send down divers. He said that divers were going to be sent down, I think it was 2-3 days after the leaks were detected in the pipelines. And he says, we're going to send down divers. So, but what's ironic about that is when he said that in September 2022, he knew from the Discord leaks, he had already had intelligence, the administration already had intelligence, and the CIA already had intelligence saying that Ukraine was maybe going to try to compromise these going to try to execute an attack on these pipelines. So when he said that in September, and he acted like, well, maybe Russia did it, we're going to send on divers to find out who did it, he knew damn well that either the US did it themselves or Ukraine did it. So the whole thing was a farce and a charade from the outset.
Yeah, let me bring so people are familiar with the site, Jeff. Here, it's important to just explain to people that a lot of people aren't aware. There's actually 4 pipes. You've got Nord Stream 1, you've got Nord Stream 2, and then you've got pipes A and B within each Nord Stream 1 and 2. So there's a total of 4 pipelines. And isn't it interesting as well that how they overlap, Jeffrey, with the exclusive economic zones of Sweden, Denmark, and Germany is also there to the south. Why is this important? Just understanding this layout, Jeff.
Well, it's important for a couple reasons. Like I said, you're correct. There are 2 pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and 2. They each have a line A and B, so there are 4 lines total. They traverse the floor of the Baltic Sea, as your audience can see. They start in Russia, they make landfall in Germany. Okay, so one of the 4 lines was ripped apart southeast of the Danish island of Bornholm. Okay. Then 17 hours later, and approximately 75 kilometers away, or 78 kilometers away, whatever it was, that same line was ruptured again, and 2 other lines began leaking. This time northeast, as you can see on the screen, northeast of the Danish island of Bornholm. And as I said, one line, Nord Stream 2, line B, remains intact. Okay, so that's extremely important to know, because one of those lines, one is if it's up to I believe if it's up to some political parties in Germany, they're going to maybe start delivering gas through that one line that's remained intact. The other thing that's very important, as you point out, and I think I knew you were going with this, Patrick, is that, and this again is one of the holes in the Andromeda theory, and I'm not saying the Andromeda theory is wrong, I'm not saying it's right, but it does have major holes in it. One major hole is there are places, these pipelines are 1,200 meters approximately long. There are many places along the pipelines that only have depths of like 20 meters, 25 meters, 30 meters, even 40 meters, the depth of the water. However, the explosions, all of them, took place at approximately 80 meters deep. So why in the heck, if you're an amateur diver, when you know that your time is limited, this is a dangerous operation. I talked to a German MP, and he tells me, and this is a German MP, by the way, I can tell you his name is Ralph Stegner. He's quoted on the record, and he is in Scholz's party, which is, an establishment party. And even he says, so I'm paraphrasing now, but he says something like to me, Jeff, this took place in the Baltic Sea. It didn't take place on Mars. This is the most, heavily, surveilled, this is NATO's lake, right? Body of water in the world. So if you're going to blow up pipelines, first of all, why do you blow them up when they're 80 meters deep? Second of all, why do you blow them up 75 to 80 kilometers apart? in 4 different places minimum. And why don't you do it where the pipelines actually cross in some places where the water is much, much more shallow? So those are just some of the, technical holes in the Andromeda theory.
You sort of poke a few holes in the Wall Street Journal reporting, and it does seem, a little bit. I don't know how to say this. I think you summed it up really well. You said that the sources for this story were kind of served up on a silver plate kind of thing. I mean, it's incredibly convenient how the story fits together. One might suspect that the journalist was given access to people in Ukraine, but how can you prove that what they're telling the journalist, they were the people doing it, that they were there and they actually did the sabotage? You're really just kind of going on the credibility of this publication and the journalist, aren't you? I think you kind of made that point.
Yes, and and again, I believe in the independent media, Patrick. I, like yourself, am an enormous skeptic of mainstream media. But I do want to emphasize that again, we don't know at this point. We just know that there are a lot more questions than answers. But let me give sort of let me share some technical thing with the audience for a second, and then I'm gonna make a general comment about these mainstream media outlets that have been focusing on the sabotage. So a lot of people have been following the sabotage, and they're kind of wonky about it. They like the technical components. So let me just say this. There were probably 6 explosions, and 3 of the bombs failed to do damage. Okay. We know that the saboteurs, they took advantage of these highly pressurized pipelines to maximize the damage. But because some of the bombs detonated at, like I said, 17 hours after others, when the lines had already been depressurized. In other words, the gas had already escaped. Most of the gas had already escaped from the lines. And by the way, this gas escaped at the speed of sound. Okay, that's how much energy was released. Because some of the bombs, again, like I said, they detonated 17 hours afterwards. When these lines were ruptured, they were depressurized. So they weren't torn apart in some locations. What does this suggest? It suggests that the timers were off, or they were mistakenly set and they caused, some bombs to be ineffective. And especially one bomb, people who study this, we call this bomb 6, okay? It wasn't placed on the seam. Now, what do I mean by that? These pipelines have seams. They're actually called field joints. I think in the technical lingo, they're called field joints. And these seams, they're much easier to perforate than the pipelines themselves because they're just made of like a very kind of a rigid, polyurethane foam, whereas the pipelines themselves are steel and they have like walls that are something like 4 centimeters in width, and they're coated with another, depending on the place, 6 to 11 centimeters of steel reinforced concrete. So you're a saboteur, you're on Andromeda, you're an average saboteur. What in the heck? And by the way, this is not difficult to figure out where the seams are. If you go to the Nord Stream AG website and you look at their tech specs, they say where the seams are. Like when we went on our expedition, we knew that we were going. One of the things we wanted to figure out is, were these bombs placed on the seams? This was public information. This wasn't like they knew about the construction of the pipelines. Not at all. So you're a saboteur. Why place or position a bomb and set a timer if the explosions wouldn't compromise the line? For example, on Nord Stream 1 line B, there's just a dent in one place. So these questions, I don't understand if these mainstream media outlets, and I was just looking before this interview, I was looking at one of the Der Spiegel pieces, and I don't know if I counted correctly, so I counted quickly, but I believe I counted 19 names on the byline of the article. 19. And they also with the Wall Street Journal. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, I am not a seasoned journalist, but I know people who are, and I'm thinking, my God, some of these independent journalists that I respect and know and I've learned from, if we had 19 people on one story and we were collaborating with the Washington Post, and who knows how many people they have on their stories, and we could be, we had travel budgets and And plus we had all, as you said earlier, access to all these European, Ukrainian, American security officials, intelligence officials, military officials. We had access to them. One of the things I would have answered immediately is I would have said, why did the bombs go off 17 hours apart? And I would have presented verifiable evidence for this. So that's kind of a general comment about, if you have this many resources, why aren't you answering some of these fundamental questions in your reporting? I don't understand it.
Well, this was explained. That's a great point you bring up. This is inside baseball of corporate journalism, and I asked one of our mainstream colleagues years ago about this and why Washington Post, New York Times, you see these tons of, especially the Post, CNN does it a lot as well, loaded with byline names. And what's going on there? He said that's how you can dilute the responsibility or the accountability in case it's wrong. But he said sometimes the publications are fed stories from the intelligence services, from the military, directly to the editorial desk, and then they'll put junior editors' names on it or junior journalists' names on it to give them a byline, to build up their byline. But it's also kind of a poison chalice as well, because if it turns out to be a fraud, then people are disposable at some level in mainstream media, but they need to stick people's names on it, but as many as possible, so that no one person can kind of be held accountable. That's how it was explained to me. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because these aren't long pieces, Jeff. These are like, 500 to 1,000 words in some cases.
Yeah, I completely see your point. Absolutely. Some of their Spiegel's pieces were quite long. This one I'm talking about today, I didn't know the word count, but just a guesstimation, maybe it was 3,000 to 4,000 words. I don't know. And I know that they have budgets. They've gone to Ukraine. They've allegedly knocked on the guy's door who funded the operation. They've allegedly gone and interviewed all the 6 people who allegedly traveled aboard Andromeda. They just have so many resources and so many contacts, and they're just some fundamental questions in addition to who actually planted the bombs and who actually funded this that have not been, irrefutably and verifiably reported. And I'd like to see that, especially since these outlets have, so many resources.
And Jeff, I just want to bring up, you supplied a couple of articles from your Substack that we're going to quickly share. If you can just quickly walk us through these 3 pieces. Here is the first one. This was up, I think it's June 19th, 2023. This is again up on your Substack, New Revelations from the Nord Stream exhibition. Just give us a quick SP on these ones.
Sure. Okay. This one is the very first one that I published after our expedition to the blast sites. And the major finding in this one is your audience will see on the screen there. That is a picture of Nord Stream 2, line A in the exclusive economic zone of Sweden. This is probably the most important blast site for doing a forensic analysis. A forensic analysis of the blast site. Why? If you look at that measurement, if I get my readers can fact check me by rereading the article, but if I remember correctly, that hole in the pipeline we're seeing there is only about a 0.5 meter wide by 2.5 meters high. Okay. So experts I talked to, when I showed them this picture, they were able to do a forensic analysis and tell me how many, what equivalent of TNT in kilograms was used to rupture the pipeline. And why is this? If you look at pictures of this pipeline and you look at pictures of other blast sites, this one looks way different. Why? Because this line was blown up twice. Once 17 hours prior, and then 17 hours later. And by the time it was the second bomb on it exploded, most of the gas had already rushed out of the pipe, and therefore it didn't lift the pipe violently above the seafloor and crack it like a chopstick and leave 50-meter holes in the pipeline. It just left this small little rupture because the damage done to the pipeline was only a result of the explosives themselves, not a combination of the explosives and the massive quick depressurization of the gas. So that's really the big finding in that article. And that debunked the reporting in the New York Times and the Guardian, for example, that said it was 500 kilograms. No, it was 10% of it, if that.
And you also supplied me with an image of the dent. Does that pertain to that article or another one?
No, the dent is very interesting. The dent, I didn't know about it. Eric didn't know about it. What happened was, and I don't remember what day it was on our expedition, but one of the days on our expedition, the weather was bad. High waves, choppy seas, etc. High winds. And when our sonar went over that part, we just overlooked it. We didn't see the dent in this line. How did we know about the dent publicly? This is fascinating. It's through the documents that Eric and I have shared on our Twitters or X, whatever you want to call it. These documents, Eric was actually the first person to break this. I don't know if it was Nord Stream AG or it was the insurers. I think it was Nord Stream who proved that one of these lines were damaged. In fact, I don't know what the purpose was, so I don't want to speak too forcefully about that. But it was actually through those potential legal proceedings, pre-trial proceedings, that they released. They talked about the dent, and then Eric went back and looked at our sonar footage and said, "Geez, there is a dent on this pipeline." So we didn't even know that there was a dent until these documents were released via the British courts.
Yeah, I think this is the piece up on stage. This a little bigger. That's again Jeffrey Brodsky Substack, ladies and gentlemen. There, breaking Nord Stream pipeline owner qualifies an embarrassing Western insurer's failure to provide evidence for the country behind the sabotage. But yes, this is interesting. Lloyd's of London, and obviously there's all kinds of implications with this, but to really get into the actual details forensic wise, you can't pull a fast one on the courts, Jeff. You might be able to do it in the media and in politics, but not in the courts when there's money involved, right?
No. And again, that embarrassing. Here we have the pipeline's owners, which again, we're only talking about Nord Stream 1 now, because this lawsuit is only about the damage against Nord Stream 1. We have the pipeline's owners, who are 49% Western, calling these Western insurers saying it's embarrassing that you think you don't have to pay up because this was, an act of war. However, you're not going to, but you won't even identify the perpetrator. So, I mean, it's frankly, it's pretty humiliating considering, how much propaganda has surrounded this story.
So was that the first indication that of this story of the dent? Again, I'll bring this dent back up on screen if this is the image in question here, Jeffrey.
The first indication of this was actually in the court documents that in those court filings. We had a picture of the dent because there was one of these sonars that you tow behind the boat. So we towed the sonar behind the boat. So we went up and down the pipelines and we made sure that we found all the damage, but we didn't realize that this was actually, again, not a perforated or a pierced pipeline, but a dent in the line, because it was hard to see that day because of the rough seas and the inclement weather. But then later, Eric when we read these court documents, Eric went back and said and found that our sonar actually picked up the dent. Well, we didn't know about it until the court documents, I should say Eric, he broke the story before I did. Till these court documents came out and Eric, made them public. He made some of them public, some of them public, but the ones he made public talked about the dent first.
And the implication, of course, there, Jeff, as you mentioned, is that something went off, but it wasn't as deadly of an explosion and didn't sever the pipe, but created a dent. And that plays into the discussion about how many bombs there were. I mean, I know Seymour Hersh has said 8 bombs. There's how many are accounted for, between 6 and 8, based on what I think you've written there. It's uncertain exactly, but the dent is very important, isn't it? This is a really key data point. Go ahead.
3 of the bombs failed to do damage. We know there were at least 6 explosions. There were 6 explosions, probably at least 6. 3 of the bombs failed to do damage. There were probably 7 because one of the bombs did not detonate and was retrieved. And we think it was retrieved, again, by the Norman Frontier, which was chartered, the Norman Frontier Norwegian boat that was chartered by the US when the Norwegian diver lost his boot.
So we're suspecting it was retrieved. We're guessing, or do we know?
Not been retrieved. It's still on the seafloor. It's still there. But we have a picture of it. We didn't retrieve. We took not a picture. Eric recorded it with his with the underwater drone.
It's
still there. Yeah, it's still there. Yes, and Hirsch just talked about 8 bombs. We do not have evidence of 8 bombs, but it doesn't mean that we're not 8 because, you know, again, if you just look at it on the surface, it would make sense that we're 8 because we're talking about 4 lines, 2 bombs per line. That's 8. However, you know, we don't know. There was some stopovers during the Andromeda voyage. If that's the true voyage, they may have tried to, you know, get more supplies to create another bomb. You know, if this was an amateur operation, maybe it's one of the, you know, who knows? There were allegedly traces of HMX, you know, which is octogen. This is a very potent explosive was found on Andromeda. Maybe there was a malfunction with one of the bombs. We're not sure. But we do know that there were probably 6 explosions and 3 bombs failed to do damage. One of the bombs did not go off and was likely retrieved.
Yep. Yeah, and then again, that's a thread that people need to start pulling on. Very important thread. Oh, so lab analysis is, again, this is Jeffrey Brodsky's Substack. Lab analysis does not detect explosives used in Nord Stream sabotage. Did someone clean up the crime scene? What's this about?
Yeah, so there's a picture. That's a picture of me holding one of the. Eric designed a very ingenious contraption. Basically, we sent down a contraption that was able to retrieve soil sediments from the seafloor right next to one of the blast sites. We chose the depressurized site because the explosive damage was so much less that, you know, of course, the sea sediment was dispersed and the you know, rapidly escaping gas dispersed the sediment. Much less so. We figured that would be the best place to see if we could detect explosives. In the end, no explosives were detected. But as I said previously, we have evidence that Sweden. Now we don't know about this crime scene because the crime scene that the submersible, the guy who drives who operates the submersible drone was not this crime scene. It was a different one. But we do have evidence that at least at one of the crime scenes, one of the blast sites, Sweden blocked off access to the sites, especially blocked off Russian black to the sites. And I interviewed, and it's in the article, I interviewed a legal scholar who said that was a blatant violation of international law. And just by the way, about Sweden, we should say this about Sweden. So Sweden conducts an investigation. Before their investigation, they block off the blast site saying, well, it's in our economic zone, it's our jurisdiction, so Russia and other vessels, you can't access the crime scenes. But then, X number of months later, so they block off the crime scenes in October, and I think they concluded their investigation in February up to 2023. So, you know, or no, it took more than a year. Was this February? Yeah. Was it February 2024 or 23? I don't remember. I think it was February 24. Okay. And when they conclude their investigation, what do they say? They say, well, we don't have jurisdiction over the matter, and therefore we can't say anything more. So the sequence of events is the following. They block off the crime scenes because they say it's their jurisdiction and their exclusive economic zone, in gross violation of international law. And then when they conclude their investigation, they say, well, it's beyond our jurisdiction. So which is it? So getting back to this blast site was not the blast site. I'm sure they cleaned up all the blast sites, but this one was not the one that I have conclusive evidence that they removed parts of the pipeline and debris from. But this was the blast site that we thought it was most prudent to collect our soil samples because, again, this was the depressurized site, that picture that I showed that was only a hole in the pipeline, only about 1/2 meter by 2.5 meters. And therefore, because the explosive was much less powerful there because the gas had already exploded. Eric correctly thought this would be the best place to try to collect the soil sediments, but they never ended up detecting anything. There's a whole backstory to that. If you want, I can talk about it. If we're running over time, we can skip the backstory. Up to you.
I just want to also get through to this piece as well. This is again up at Jeffrey Brodsky's Substack. What is and what isn't known about the Nord Stream sabotage? The public is still in the dark about the attack on the pipelines that transformed Russian transferred Russian natural gas to Europe across the Baltic Sea. Will the Swedish prosecutors switch on the light? So both Denmark and Sweden, and I think you kind of allude to this, of course, in your writing, Jeffrey, both Denmark and Sweden basically conducted this investigation and then basically shut it down. And between them and Germany, nothing has really been disclosed to the public. And of course, what's this doing, Jeffrey? It's fueling a lot more speculation, so your thoughts?
Well, yeah. They can, obviously, I mean, they complain about misinformation and outright disinformation. That's complained about, and I think that's a problem too. But the best way to combat this disinformation is to I would say, just tell the truth, but not just tell the truth or it's present irrefutable, verifiable evidence of your claims, whether you're a journalist, a lawyer, or a politician, or anybody else. So yeah, this piece that you're showing now, Patrick, I would encourage readers, if they're interested, to read some of my later articles, because this piece was written, I don't remember the exact date on it, but it's
November,
it's
November 2023, I think.
Yeah, so that was what was known up to that point, in terms of the amount of explosives used, what was said about the the Danish, Swedish investigations, what was said publicly, what we know, what forensic things we know about how the sabotage operation was executed, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit dated now, that piece.
Yep. So again,
a lot more has come to light. I've written about it.
Great resources again, which are up on Jeffrey Brodsky's Substack here. And this one I want to share with you as well, Jeff. I'm just going to bring up some part of this, which I think is really worth looking at here. We published this at 21st Century Wire just on Friday. Is Nord Stream 2 back in business? On January 28th, 2025, Russia's Gazprom, allowing for the preservation of Nord Stream 2 pipeline material in the Baltic Sea. And so basically it's like for environmental reasons, environmental safety, plugging two ends, basically stealing two ends of the pipeline. That's what they're doing. But what's really interesting here, Jeffrey, is details, really precise details about the pipeline, about the engineering, about the conditions of the pipeline, and of course, even the actual specs here. So it's a very good resource, and a hat tip to Freddie Ponton at 21st Century Wire for translating this for us and posting it. So this is very interesting. So Jeff, like the Lloyds of London case here, I mean, this kind of means in a way Russian parties have access to the site. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jeffrey, on this. If Russian parties have access to data collection and who knows what do you think they could potentially also find? Your professional opinion on this. Just speculate if you have to, Jeff, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. No, I will not duck the question, of course. Let me just say one thing just to clarify, because there's a lot of Nord Stream geeks out there like I am, and I want to make sure that I provide accurate analysis. So again, there were 6 blasts and there were 3 failed bombs. One of the bombs was maybe dropped by one of the saboteurs, so there may have been 7 bombs. So we probably have evidence for 7 bombs, but not 8, at least not at this point. Okay. Right. To answer your question about Russia, Patrick, no, I won't say. I won't say. I'm going to speculate. This is just speculation. I don't know, but one of the things I don't understand about Russia in general. First of all, I've never been to Russia, but there are two things I'll say. Talking to one of my sources, one of my sources communicates with I believe he was a senior reporter of Russian TV1. Maybe you can correct me on this.
Russia One, yeah.
One of the major Russian television stations. And my understanding is that Russians watch this station, that it's, you know, I think my source said it was like, you know, bigger than like CNN or something.
Yeah, it's like the BBC equivalent for Russia. Yeah.
Okay. So it's major, and he's a senior reporter. Okay. And he's interested in Nord Stream. So, and he's, by the way, I think he's been recently, his visa was recently withdrawn. And I think he was based, I think, in Berlin, and he's had to go back to Russia, is my understanding. So, and he has major contacts and sources. And he says, the Russian government doesn't leak information. They don't say about Nord Stream. They don't say what they know and what they don't know. And maybe you can interpret that in a lot of ways, but one way you can interpret that is, oh, maybe they're running a tight ship. Maybe they're really professionals and they don't leak anything to reporters. The other way you can interpret that is that, well, I don't know, but they don't even leak things that would benefit them, in my opinion. Like, I don't remember, you might more than I do because I didn't follow the stories much, but one of the bridges, or was it one of the power plants in Ukraine, one of the bridges was, I think one of the power plants was clearly attacked by Ukraine. And this was maybe in the beginning of the war. And Russia allowed the mainstream media to just say, oh, Russia did this. Russia's jeopardizing lives by, you know, attacking nuclear power plants and stuff like that. And Russia knew for sure and had verifiable evidence that it was Ukraine. And they didn't present it in the United Nations Security Council. They didn't publish images or documents or anything that would have cleared their name.
Jeff, let me just speak to that for a moment. You know, they're notoriously, and there's so much criticism within Russia about how non-media savvy the government is. I mean, it's really tragic how bad they are at public relations, but they don't do the kind of counterattack. All that stuff we're kind of used to, how this stuff plays out, becomes part of government strategy of communication, laundering information, false leads, and all that. Totally different in post-Soviet Russia. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Maybe not all of it, but it might be part of it, Jeff. Go ahead.
Right. And to answer your question, so, you know, your question is basically, well, what can Russia garner by accessing these sites? Well, I think that's an excellent question. And even a further question is, they have surveillance technology. They're a major world power. These are $20 billion pipelines that were important to them and gave them billions of dollars of revenue per year. They likely know exactly who did this. So present the evidence. It's very strange. And the last thing I'll say is I was talking to one of my sources, and this is probably my most high level source, this person. This person is so high level that the day or the day after, around the couple days when Nord Stream blew up, this person called the former prime minister of Sweden on the phone, just friendly, and said, what the heck is going on? Former prime minister of Sweden says to this person, I'm just glad I'm not in politics anymore. I'm not in government anymore, something to that effect. And this person has also told me off the record several times, lamenting the fact that it appears that Russia does not defend its own interests. And it's a real head scratcher to me. So I don't know.
Yeah, so I'll add this as well. The way Russians look at geopolitics, and it's taken me over a decade to work this out. And then, you know, having visited the country and speaking to journalists there, talking to people in, you know, foreign affairs and the national security community there, they have a totally different timeline horizon for any issue. It's the same with Chinese, but the Russians are looking at this sort of broader timeline. So while they could know everything about Nord Stream and who did it, they might even have evidence that could completely blow the whole thing open. They're looking at everything as leverage for them. So to them, it's bigger than Nord Stream. It's the existence of NATO. It's the war in Ukraine. It's Turkey and Syria and Iran and the Pacific Rim as well, and those security issues. There's interballistic missile treaties, all of these things. Everything has leverage attached to it, and they're kind of on the defensive. Russia and America and NATO are more on the offensive. So I think this is why they probably play their poker so tight to their chest, because they're thinking, how could this be useful for us for the next thing that we're trying to negotiate? But yeah, it's a different mindset, totally different mindset, I think, than what many of us, even Russians, are baffled by it, by the way. It's not just us asking these questions. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I don't have much more to say on that. I mean, it's just a different cultural mindset, a different view of geopolitics, different, I mean, maybe it's positive. Maybe they're thinking about a larger picture. What do they want geopolitics? What do they want their strategy? What do they want, their sphere of influence to look like in X number of years? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because here in the West, and especially Americans, we instant gratification culture. I don't know.
Well, again, we just got a minute or two left, and I want to give a good shout out to, your platforms as well, Jeffrey, here. Again, just a reminder, Substack, Jeffrey Brodsky here, new revelations from a Nord Stream expedition, and you'll see some of his later stuff there. Plus, he's got some excellent pieces. Well, we've got this one where we're at 21st Century Wire as well. I want to direct people to that. This is great. There's great links in here as well that will take you around to other resources. He mentioned Eric Anderson's work as well, the great engineer, and who's done tremendous work there, who Jeffrey accompanied on that first independent kind of underwater expedition, if you will. And here is the Twitter account for Jeffrey Brodsky. Sorry, X. I'm still in the old mode. X, formerly Twitter, there, Jeffrey Brodsky 5. You can dial him up there on X as well. And then if you go to his X account, you'll have the links to his Substack as well. So those are your links there. Just your final thoughts. I know there's a lot I mean, we're only scratching the surface. This is a real cursory discussion that we're having. We're really just kind of doing a broad overview and hitting some things that hopefully people will be, interested in and, delve into it themselves, either through 21 Wire, Jeffrey's piece there, which is up, and also his Substack. And then obviously the other independent journalists that we mentioned, Eric Anderson and others. Freddie Ponton has also done some interesting and in-depth research on this very topic at 21st Century Wire. So there's a lot of great resources out there, Jeffrey, and just give us your final thoughts on this story in general. Where do you think it's at? Where do you think it might be going in the near future? Go ahead.
For the truth to finally come out, there's some hope in the new German elections. I know that Sarah Wagenknecht is pretty serious about this. So maybe if she gets enough representation in Parliament, she can, effectuate something positive. But I tend to agree with you, Patrick. I think that I think the ball is just starting to be rolled here on this, because hopefully the war in Ukraine will come to an end and the violence will come to an end, and then hopefully more of the truth will come out. So, look what's happening in Ukraine, because Nord Stream can't be separated from the war in Ukraine, and look what happens maybe in the German elections. The other thing is I want to say another independent researcher who is spectacular. His name is Michael Cobbs.
Yes.
Michael Cobbs, he also has done some incredible Nord Stream stuff. I linked some of his work in the piece. Other thing is that I know there's a lot of Nord Stream geeks out there. So we just did a cursory discussion here. Yeah. So, please maybe read the full article. And also I'm available. My DMs are open on Twitter. So if people have comments or questions, or they want to correct me in something, I'm happy to hear their insight. You can also email me. I'm available. And that's it, pretty much. Thank you a ton for inviting me on your show. It's been great.
Yeah, and again, we hopefully will open the door to some future discussions on this topic. It's vast. We have really just grazed it today in the last 90 minutes. So, and again, let's point people up on screen here to this fantastic piece here by Jeffrey Brodsky at 21stcenturywire.com. Exclusive: former Ukrainian commander-in-chief can be prosecuted for role in a Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, opening the door for what could be a diplomatic and geopolitical chess match. But the details of the status of all the investigations and what's known and not known is actually contained in this great piece, in-depth piece here, published and written by Jeffrey Brodsky up at 21stcenturywire.com. So I encourage people to go there. Jeffrey, thank you very much for your time, and go ahead.
All right, Patrick, there's just one more thing. First of all, thank you for those kind words. And it's been an honor to work for 21st Century Wire. I want to say one more thing. If there's anyone listening who's more comfortable reading in Spanish, my articles are always published also in Spanish. They're published for a newspaper here in Spain and a website here in Spain. It's called Diario 16. And you can also read all my work in Spanish. I have a wonderful editor there named Bea Talagon, and she does my editing there in Spanish. I write the piece in Spanish, and then she corrects anything she sees. And so that's if people more interested in reading in Spanish, they're also available in Spanish. That's really it.
That can be accessed via your X Twitter feed, right?
Yeah, it'll be the artist formerly known as Twitter, currently X. It's there.
Great bilingual resource as well. Jeffrey Brodsky, independent journalist, writer, author, and of course, doing great work on the subject of the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Thank you very much for joining us on the Sunday Wire this week. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Jeffrey Brodsky. I'll tell you what we're going to do right now. We're going to take a break here at the Alternate Current Radio Network. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by a couple of our colleagues. Hesher and Ruckus are in the house. A couple of major stories breaking. We're going to cover those. So controversy is coming after the break. I guarantee it. So in the meantime, enjoy the music of Joseph Arthur. We'll be right back.
Gratitude, the antidote. The world is built on fear. The evil world we live in wants our soul to disappear. But gratitude, salvation, and never any light that transcends all the darkness trying to hold us to the night. Thoughts say what is missing. Thank you says what's here. Thoughts keep us unconscious. Thank you makes it clear. Back into the moment, the vast eternal now, where God is always with us and holy like a cow, like a sunrise or a child or a garden full of roses. The mind misses the magic. He considers all the poses. Why our thoughts against us, principalities are there, whispering indifference on foundations of despair. So thank you is my mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra. Who set up this funhouse, this journey for our soul, where most never make it and lose all their control? How do we get back any sovereignty from the lies of demons that we pretend to be? Thank you is a pass to a place outside of hell. Gratitude and presence will lift us where we fell, but we have to make a practice to come back into now, in the garden of our gratitude, and push that ancient plow. I don't know the reason we are in a holy war, how we ever come back to who we were before. Did it start in Eden with an apple and a snake? Since then, have we been following with this battle as our fate? So thank you is my mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra. The world will light us, and so will our minds. So will our minds. Whatever is the reason, this is where we are. The light and the darkness are aiming for our heart. The light wants us present in the clutch of gratitude. The darkness wants us scattered with an evil attitude. And we look at the thinking that justifies the course. We see it's thought itself that brings on the divorce. From the Holy Spirit, from revelations gloom, from the love of God to the darkness of the tomb. Voices of all demons we identify as us, and then we follow lies, the wrong voices that we trust. Take us to destruction, take us to despair, when the gift of God himself has always just been here. So thank you is my mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra.